This is Jack Rice at the United Nations, and I'm here with Edward Luck. He's an Assistant Secretary General, also talking about the responsibility to protect. Edward, thank you very much for joining me.
I'm glad to.
We think about the obligations to protect, and yet I look at Darfur. I'm back there about 2 months. I think about Rwanda. I think about the Democratic Republic of Congo. I think about Myanmar. And isn't that responsible?
Well, certainly we haven't been able to solve all those problems by any means, but at least the UN is on the ground trying to make a difference in each of those situations. And very importantly, the norm, the principle that countries have a responsibility to protect their citizens from genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and war crimes is very important. That now all the heads of state and government have signed on and agreed to this, that they will protect their people. They don't always do it, and then the UN regional organizations have to come in and try to push them a little bit. The case of Darfur is particularly sad. That started the violence 3 years before the UN, the member states, accepted this principle, so really predated the concept. But most recently this has been applied in Kenya. But you remember at the beginning of the year with the elections and the disputes afterwards, there was a lot of violence, a lot of killing, and it could have gotten much, much worse. But the UN went in, the Secretary General, former Secretary General Kofi Annan doing the day-to-day mediation, and they used this concept of responsibility to protect. They reminded the leaders, both of the government and of the opposition, that they had this fundamental legal responsibility, and it seems to have made some difference. And that one, of course, it's not in the headlines anymore because it's no longer violent conflict. So we hear about the ones that we can't resolve, but some of them actually do get done.
So in the end, that's the rub. It becomes everybody will agree. Everybody will say, oh, we would never want that to happen. But the real problem is convincing them to act upon the things that they say they believe in.
No, that's certainly true. But if you actually look at the statistics over the years, there's far fewer genocides today, for example, than there were before 1990. I think we're going in the right direction. We have a long ways to go, and we see these atrocities occurring, and we throw our hands up. But we have to recognize historically it's getting more difficult, for example, for a country in the Security Council to veto a response to an unfolding genocide. And it's certainly expected now that every government has this kind of responsibility towards its people. And that is the norm, that is the law, that is what is expected of the governments.
When we look at this, when we look at how we approach it, it seems that when everybody agrees, and then they will agree to step up and stop this within their own countries, what's the step that you take when they won't do that?
Well, there's a lot of things. For example, without any decision by the Security Council, the Secretary General can do quite a bit on his own initiative, and he often does. He can do mediation like he did recently in Myanmar. He went there personally. It was a big risk for him politically, and put it on the line with the leadership there, saying the whole international community was united in telling them they had to get their act together, had to get the aid to the people who needed it most. The door was only open an inch or two. He pushed it open a few more inches. It's not as wide open as we'd like it to be, but certainly there's much more aid going in, far more aid workers. And that was without any resolution of the Security Council, without any decision by any intergovernmental body. It's simply the Secretary General himself taking that kind of initiative. And that makes a real difference.
Is there a need to take this to the Security Council? There's an estimated 1 million, maybe 1.5 million people who are still without aid whatsoever. And what's going to happen to those people, not just in the short term, but in the long term?
Well, my personal view is that at this point in time, diplomacy, both of the quiet and of the noisy kind, both, is making some difference. And it's not just the UN, but the neighbors are pushing them as well. China is very important, has a lot of leverage with the Myanmar authorities that the rest of us don't have. But the other neighbors from the ASEAN countries each are stepping up and putting pressure on them as well. And so the regime seems to be listening now. It's not a perfect response, but it's a much better response than it was a few weeks ago.
I know you've been working at the UN for a long, long time, on in and outside, also a professor at Columbia University as well. When we talk about the role of the United States as it applies here, it seems it depends upon which administration is in or what the environment is. How important is the U.S. role to ensuring the success of the United Nations?
Well, I think the U.S. is instrumental. It was the key country in founding the UN. For all the problems that the U.S. has had, it remains the most powerful country in the world. Certainly for many military kinds of issues, many economic issues, it's very important to have the U.S. Taking a positive stance, or at least not blocking things within the organization. But again, the UN is a universal organization, 192 countries. The U.S. is not alone by any means, and need the UN to build coalitions, very coalitions, different countries to try to get things working together. So it's not relying on just one country. It's relying on the possibility of the UN for legitimate one countries that gives a place to do it. Countries that here always don't need any place. So the UN really gives countries a chance, and the U.S. hopefully gives the UN a chance. And I think what we find, some of you said different administrations. We've had several administrations in the U.S. Presidents came in very negative, very skeptical about the UN. Over time, they all seem to realize, yeah, maybe they don't love the UN, but they need it. It's part of the furniture of international relations. So even a powerful country needs the UN to help get much of its own business done.
Do you find that those in the UN sort of watch the presidential races here and think, oh, that guy will be good, or that woman, or well, I guess it would be guys now, that guy would be good, or that guy would be good, or do you just, out of complete fear on who might win, do you simply sit back and keep your mouth shut and say, oh yeah, everybody would be great, but they'd both be fantastic?
Well, it's funny because many Americans think the UN is a very foreign, distant kind of an organization. But it's not coincidental that it's based here in New York. And the delegates really like to see the American political scene. It's exciting, it's open, it's uncertain. And this year in particular, this has been a very exciting race for them. And you get delegates from all kinds of countries coming to me and saying, look, we never thought that a black American could go so far, or that a woman could go so far, or that you would have such an exciting, interested race with all these new people turning out to vote for the first time. So I think the very process is a good testimony to democracy. And I think many, many states see that here. And they may not always like American foreign policy, but they are very attracted to the way we conduct our politics. And I think this year in particular, yeah, they're the favorites, obviously. Some countries like this one, some countries like that one. But I think
the Kenyan guy, right?
At
least amongst some, amongst one of some Kenyan people when I was in Nairobi. I had people from Nairobi saying to me, yeah, "That's our guy." I mean, because you're always looking for your guy.
Well, I was traveling some places in Asia during the Democratic debates, and various foreign ministries, they always had it on the TV, and they're watching it in the background. And yes, he's brought a lot of excitement to it. But McCain is a very seasoned foreign policy guy, and I think they feel pretty comfortable with him as well. I think for most of the delegates here, the good news is that anyone who is really anti-internationalist, anti-UN has really dropped out. So that any of these last three contenders, I think for most of the people here would have been a new chapter. And one of the great things about American politics, every 4 years, every 2 years with the Congress, you get some turnover, you get some change. So if you don't like the way it is today, maybe you'll like it tomorrow. Of course, if you like it today, you may like it less tomorrow. But it makes it interesting. It's very dynamic. And there are parts of the world where leaders don't like to leave, and they stay on and on and on. So for people from those countries, it's very exciting to see a place that has an orderly, peaceful change. It's not predictable because we don't know who's going to win, but it's orderly and peaceful and brings in new blood and a lot of excitement. So I think it's a good thing.
So I guess the idea the cup is either half full or it's half empty, depending on how you see it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Again, looking at the obligation to protect here at the United Nations. This is Jack Rice in New York City.